Racist judge finds black trucker and then discovers that he is a former federal prosecutor. The clock struck 7:52 a.m. when Solano Davis, 62, parked his truck in the dusty courtyard of the municipal courthouse in Harperville, Alabama. It was a muggy Monday morning, and the sun was already shining brightly on the worn bodywork of the vehicle. Solano descended slowly, with the weight of age on his knees and injustice on his shoulders. He wore worn-out jeans, shabby boots, and a faded plaid shirt, common clothing for someone who had been crossing the country carrying food and items for more than 2 decades. In his hands, he carried an old brown briefcase with the documents that proved the error of the $850 fine he received for an improper parking of cargo. The location? A stretch of road where he had to stop for safety after a brake fluid leak. He photographed everything. There were reports from the workshop, witnesses to the tow truck. But that, in Solano's mind, was not the most important thing. What really hurt was the treatment he received when approached by the traffic officer days before. The way he was looked at, as if his voice had no value, as if its color said more than its history. He took a deep breath as he entered the old courthouse building. The narrow corridors exuded the smell of old coffee and paper moistened by time. The walls had wooden plaques with the names of old judges and a barely functioning water machine. No employee looked at him. A security guard did not even greet him. At the reception, when he tried to confirm the room of his audience, he heard an indifferent, "Room 1B. He waits to be called, that's all." As he walked to the indicated room, Solano noticed the looks, some curious, others suspicious, as if a black, elderly man with simple clothes did not belong there, even though he was there as a citizen by right, even carrying evidence that the fine was a mistake. As he sat in the back row, he watched the other defendants. Most of them were young whites in social clothes or uniforms from local businesses. One arrived late, another played on his cell phone. Everyone was treated politely. Solano did not seek privilege, he sought justice. And he knew that court well. Years ago, he himself had already been in many as a federal prosecutor. But on that day, he chose to enter like any ordinary citizen, not for what he was, but only for what he was now. A man who carries cargo in the truck and in his chest. The dignity of someone who has fought for many. Little did the judge know that this truck driver was more than he seemed, and this story was about to become a milestone. Room 1B was full but quiet. The kind of silence that precedes tension. The wooden chairs creaked under the weight of waiting and anxiety. At the top, the coat of arms of the town of Harperville hung slightly crooked on the wall. It was a municipal courthouse, but the atmosphere there reminded of something more serious, more oppressive. Solano Davis watched the faces around him. A young white man in a polo shirt laughed discreetly as he told a story to his colleague next door. 2 men in suits whispered something as they checked their watches. A blonde woman in a blue blazer looked at her cell phone, impatient. Then the back door opened. The sound of steady heels echoed through the room. Judge Bradley Merton entered with an upright posture, dark gray suit, white hair carefully combed back. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just sat down, as if he knew that. There, he was the supreme authority, all standing. The bailiff announced in a firm voice. Everyone stood up. Solano, too, keeping his head up, even if his heart beat faster. The session began with quick cases. A white boy with multiple speeding tickets received a verbal warning and a payment plan. A lady who parked in a prohibited place was exempted with a simple, "I'll give you a warning this time." Solano watched. Every word, every tone, every expression. At 8:43 a.m., his name echoed through the room. Solano Davis. He walked to the podium with firm but calm steps. He carried the folder with the defense documents. He was about to open his mouth when he was interrupted. "Mr. Davis," the referee said without even raising his head, "get here like this with this inappropriate attire, and do you think you can challenge official decisions?" The room froze. The air became heavy. Solano, in shock, looked up at the judge, who was now staring at him. "Do you think this is a gas station?" This is a courtroom, and time here is precious. The fine is maintained. Use $850. Next. Silence. The pain was not the fine. It was the trial. It was contempt. Solano stood still for a second. The judge was already moving on to the next case as if he had just dispensed with an inconvenience. The people in the room exchanged uncomfortable looks. A woman frowned. The young man who laughed before was now serious. Solano just closed the folder slowly and returned to his place. But as he walked back to the bench, his gaze was different. A look that had faced this type of authority before. Only this time, it would be different. From that moment on, he decided he wasn't going to let it go. Solano sat down again in the back row near the wall, in the same place from which he had observed the other cases. But now, his expression was different. The jaw cracked, the eyes fixed, silence loaded with intention. He opened the briefcase on his lap. The fine documents were still there, but it wasn't them he paid attention to. He took an old notebook, hardcover, worn edges, and he began to write. Name, timetable, judge's conduct, reactions from the public, differences in treatment. Page by page, he began to record with surgical precision what was happening in that room. A young white man arrived late. No reprimand. A white woman received praise for bringing organized documents, something Solano had also done, but was ignored. It was like being back in the district attorney's office, in the days when he was leading federal investigations. Only now he was not in charge of an operation. He was on the battlefield being treated like nothing because of the color of his skin and the simplicity of his clothing. But that didn't shake him. It only rekindled something that never died. The sense of justice. Solano looked around and saw uncomfortable faces. People realized what was happening, but no one said anything. The fear of the system spoke louder. In front, the clerk hesitated between typing and observing. His nervousness was noticeable. It was then that Solano looked up and saw the reflection of the past. Judge Merton, with the same posture as many others he faced as a prosecutor. Men who abused power because they thought they would never be questioned. But now he was no longer just a driver with documents. Now he was a former prosecutor, watching a scene of injustice repeat before his eyes, and writing it all down to expose every detail. What the judge didn't know it is that he had just planted the seed of his own fall. The session continued, case after case, but something had changed. As Judge Merton spoke, a quiet tension hung in the air. People cast discreet glances in the direction of Solano Davis, the truck driver who had been humiliated. But he remained calm. Would he be just another victim of the system? No, because Solano stood up. He did not wait to be called. He did not ask permission. He just approached the podium with slow and steady steps, as if carrying a heavy but necessary decision. The judge, annoyed, looked up. "You have been dismissed, Mr. Davis. Go back to your seat." But Solano did not back down. He put his hand in the briefcase and took away something that none of those present expected to see. A golden, aged but gleaming federal badge, and next to it, a plasticized identification card with his name printed in large letters, Solano L. Davis, retired federal prosecutor, Southern District of Georgia. The murmur was immediate. The room came to a standstill. Solano took a deep breath and spoke in a deep and respectful voice. "Before driving a truck, Your Honor, I served as a federal prosecutor for more than 25 years. I fought against corruption, human trafficking, and defended citizens whose rights were ignored." He paused. The room was completely silent. "Today, I was treated as if my voice didn't matter, as if my appearance told you everything you needed to know about me. This is not justice. It's prejudice disguised as authority." Judge Merton's face, once rigid, turned pale, his eyes wide, speechless. The clerk stopped typing. A young man in the background dropped his cell phone on his lap. A woman on the side put her hand to her mouth. Solano continued, "I came here just to contest a fine. But now I see that there's something much bigger going on in this room, and I can assure you, Your Honor, this will not go unnoticed. He didn't scream, he did not threaten. He only spoke the truth, with a dignity that cut through the silence like a sharp blade. He kept the badge. He arranged the briefcase. "Thank you for your time," and he returned to his seat. But the energy in the room had already changed. Definitely. The session was closed minutes after Solano's revelation. Judge Merton could barely keep his composure. His hands trembled slightly as he read the remaining names on the list. His eyes avoided any eye contact with Solano, now sitting again, but not as before. He was no longer seen as just any truck driver. As the last defendants left the courtroom, the buzz took over the corridors. Some people stopped Solano on the way out. "You were brave. We see this here every day, but no one speaks. Thank you for saying what we all feel." But Solano did not seek applause. He sought justice. On the bench in the square in front of the courthouse, he opened his notebook again. He rewrote his notes more clearly. And then, with his cell phone in hand, he sent a short message to an old contact. "Julia Harper, Georgia. District Attorney, we need to talk. I saw something today, grave." Julia responded within minutes. Hours later, Solano sent an initial report with everything he saw that morning. It included the names, the times, the difference in treatment between the defendants. He sent photos of the fine, the chronology of events, and his full account of Judge Merton's speech. He was meticulous, cold, technician, impartial, as a prosecutor would. By the next morning, the news was already quietly circulating among members of the Justice Department. At the same time, a young law student who had watched the scene of the revelation published an account on social networks with the phrase, "Today a truck driver was humiliated by a judge." But what no one knew was that he was a former federal prosecutor. And now the tables have turned. The post went viral. Within hours, the hashtag #DeLay Justicia para Solano began to appear on the timelines of lawyers, activists, professors, and journalists. People began to comment on their experiences with the Harperville courthouse. Similar stories, different treatments. What was an isolated case? Now it was a pattern being exposed. Solano, for his part, remained firm and discreet. He did not give interviews. He did not seek the stage. He knew it wasn't about him. It was about a system that was finally beginning to be questioned. 3 days after Solano Davis's formal complaint, the Harperville court was no longer the same. Investigators from the State Judicial Commission discreetly arrived at the scene. They entered with badges and sealed folders. They asked for access to the last 5 years of Justice Merton's decisions. The movement drew attention and scared them. Judge Merton tried to maintain his routine. Toga aligned, steady gaze, short answers. But the nervousness was evident. During the sessions, his posture oscillated between arrogance and insecurity. He didn't know how many doors were opening behind the scenes, and how many voices that had previously been silenced were now beginning to speak out. Evidence began to emerge. The data was clear, cold, and devastating. Black defendants were fined, on average 3 times more for infractions similar to white defendants. Verbal warnings, common for whites, were very rare with minorities. Applications for payment plans were often denied for black families, while approved for whites with similar backgrounds. And then came the key piece. The court clerk, Mrs. Thompson, a longtime employee, respected, but always silent. She sought out the investigators and with trembling hands handed over a notebook that had been hidden for years. I wrote everything down. Every time I felt something was wrong, I was afraid to speak, but now I know I'm not alone anymore. The notebook had dates, names, decisions, subjective observations of the judge. This seems like a problem. I don't trust people like that. All cataloged. In parallel, testimonies began to multiply on social networks. Black mothers, Latino drivers, young students, all with similar stories. He didn't even look me in the eye. He denied my request before he even heard my argument. I saw a white guy do worse and leave with a handshake. Given the weight of the evidence, the Judicial Commission scheduled a disciplinary hearing. Regional newspapers began covering the case. Headlines such as "Judge under investigation for discriminatory patterns" and "Trucker becomes a symbol of justice in Harperville" gained space in the news. Under pressure, Judge Merton released a public statement. "I never intended to treat anyone equally. If my actions were misinterpreted, I am deeply sorry. But it was too late. The damage was already done, and the truth had already been exposed." Judge Merton's resignation came on a cloudy Friday with no press conference, no emotional speech. Just one protocol email sent to the Judicial Commission. "I believe my departure will allow this court to proceed with integrity and without distractions." But the town of Harperville was no longer the same. The courthouse, once a place where Black people entered in fear and left quietly, now became a symbol of something rare, true transformation. In the months that followed, visible and invisible reforms. The previously peeling walls were painted. A new service desk with guidance in several languages was installed. Pamphlets were distributed, explaining the defendant's basic rights, legal deadlines, and what to expect from each hearing. A fair and standardized payment plan was approved for all fines, and above the main door, a new golden plaque. "Justice has no color, he has character." New leadership, the substitute judge was chosen carefully. Dr. Aisha Coleman, 42 years old, Black, born and raised in a neighboring city, known for her ethical, balanced, and approachable stance. Upon taking office, he declared, "My job is to make sure no one comes in here for fear of being invisible." His presence represented something much bigger than a new name, a new cycle. Mandatory training: all court staff, judges, officers, clerks, and assistants are now required to receive mandatory training in implicit bias, restorative justice, and equitable conduct. Bailiff James Wilson, who worked for years under Merton, now leads the trainings. In his speech, he sums up the spirit of change. "Our job is not just to maintain order. It is to ensure that every person here is treated with respect. The silence, it is the ground where injustice grows." While all this was happening, Solano Davis watched from afar. He was not looking for a stage. He was not looking for recognition, but an unexpected invitation arrived. "Mr. Davis, we would like to invite you to speak at the opening of the court's new judicial ethics cycle." His story was the starting point of this change. He accepted, and he knew. That room where he had been humiliated. Now she was being rescued by the same people she tried to silence. 3 months after that morning in which he was humiliated, Solano Davis found himself standing again in front of the same courthouse. But everything was different. The doors were no longer intimidating. The atmosphere did not carry fear. And the sign above the entrance, "Justice has no color. It has character," reflected not only the sunlight but also the change he helped sow. This time, he didn't go in alone. Next to him was his grandson, Malik, 11, wearing a shirt with the print, "My grandfather didn't give up, so I'm not going either." At the invitation of the new judge and the Judicial Ethics Commission, Solano was the Speaker of Honor at the opening of the new training cycle for public servants of justice. In front of a room full of lawyers, law students, and new judges, he took the podium with the same posture as always, calm, firmness, and truth in his eyes. He didn't talk about his pain. He spoke about his choice. "That day I could have swallowed hard, gone home, and moved on with my life. But I knew that the silence had already done too much damage in this place. I didn't speak for myself. I spoke for everyone who was silenced before me." Solano paused, looked at his grandson sitting in the front row, and continued. "Justice is not a toga. It is a posture. It's knowing that every human being deserves respect, no matter the color, the clothing, or the title." The room rose to applause, but it was at the end, as he left the courtroom with Malik by his side, that the most symbolic moment happened. Standing at the top of the steps, Solano looked back at that building where it all began and whispered, It wasn't about me, Malik. It was about what you're going to find when you're an adult. It was about paving the way. The boy nodded silently, and at that moment, it was no longer the former prosecutor, nor the truck driver, nor the wronged defendant. Who was there? He was the man who changed an entire system, with a firm voice and a righteous heart. Some men carry the weight of the world on their backs. Others carry the silence of generations. Solano Davis did not enter that court just as a truck driver. He came in as the voice of one who was never heard, and it proved that dignity does not depend on status, but on the courage to face what many pretend not to see. If this story touched you, comment now. Justice begins when someone has the courage to speak, and mark someone who would never bow his head in the face of injustice. Share this video with those who believe that silence, it can also be a form of oppression, because sometimes all the system needs to change is a man who refuses to pretend he hasn't seen it.